A recent report by the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, NATI, reveals that Nigeria lost 362.28 million barrels of crude oil between 2014 and 2023, primarily due to measurement errors, sabotage and production adjustments. This equates to a daily loss of 992,547 barrels, with 2016 marking the peak at 101.6 million barrels lost. The report underscores the ongoing challenges in managing Nigeria's oil resources with the need to improve, or let's say the need for improved technology, infrastructure and public-private partnerships to curb further losses and enhance accountability in the sector. Joining me for this, I have Jide Pratt, COO, Iona Nigeria, and Country Manager, Trade Grid. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
But looking at that particular report, it puts the total loss at 362.28 million barrels of crude oil. Now, looking at that and the causes or some of the factors that are responsible for what happened, and we're talking about measurement errors, talking about sabotage, and also looking at production adjustments and all of those, which is even more damning, the fact that we lost this amount of crude oil or that we lost them due to measurement errors, sabotage, which is more damning?
Thank you for talking to me again. I think that one thing that is clear is that they're both damning. If we go into the details of which is more, then I'd say the losses. However, if we say the losses are more damning, then the question is this: measurement errors, failure of equipment. These are things that are within the control of us who run these things. So it's sad that that phenomenal amount is lost based on what I would call, again, an own goal, because we could have mitigated against these things. That would be my initial take.
All right, so for you, what's the impact of this loss on the sector and even the economy? Clearly,
if you look at it, that Nigeria is an oil-producing country. So one of the benefits of selling crude oil is that in terms of revenue, and now we're talking about revenue from the point of federation account. So it means that two things, and you notice that the budget more often than not is hinged on the production number. This is the number of barrels and then a price. So if you lose so much, automatically what you've done is that you've lost revenue to the federation account. It means that there's less to share between the federal, the state, and the local government. If this continues for a long period of time, then what it is that the company, the country is not earning as much as she can in terms of revenue. Now, that's just on the one side. So on the second side is that if she's not earning as much as she is, when she does earn, how productive is the use of what is earned? So any loss, any way you look at it, as crude oil prices continue to drop, even if they go back, but the time where they drop, it means that your revenue as a country is reduced. And of course, that has impacts on the GDP.
Well, how much of this do you think is also responsible for maybe the fact that we're seeing IOCs exiting the onshore, fields?
I'm not so sure that is there. So look at it this way. There are international oil companies that have been in Nigeria for upwards of 50 to 60 years. Now, where do they play? They play in two spaces: deep offshore and what you call shallow or swamp. So what it is that they've been there for decades. And it's time for them to move their capital somewhere else, in their opinion. But don't forget, this presents an automatic opportunity in terms of shallow, because we do have quite a lot of oil in the shallow oil fields. However, it's now a transfer of, let me say, the asset from an international oil company who has decided to go somewhere else. But it does present a case for some Nigerian companies.
But are they able to fill that space? That's the question.
My answer would be yes. And why do you need to fill it? First and foremost is capital. So if we look at the closest thing that has happened in terms of, the ExxonMobil hasn't happened yet. If we look at what has happened in terms of Owando was able to raise capital. Owando is a local company. So what it does mean is that everybody that is going to finance an international oil company that's gone will look at it that if the asset is still locally in Nigeria and there's what you call bankability, it means that it's a viable business, then of course capital will be raised, because the cardinal rule is this: capital would always chase investment. So I do think that while they leave, they can step into those shoes if corporate governance becomes one of the greatest things that they do chase. I think so, yes.
All right, now let's take another look at, this crude oil loss. We saw that it was rising steadily, and then we also saw the losses reducing. 2023 was quite spectacular. We're talking about 7 million barrels, and we're also seeing a decline from 2022. What do you think is responsible for the decline in the losses we have seen so far? That's crude oil theft or crude loss, yeah.
I think I'd put it at awareness. There's more, I'm not saying the accountability has gotten to where we need it to be, but there's more awareness. People are talking about this more. So there's more focus and emphasis on it. What has happened in the past is that this has been happening for decades, but nobody has really been speaking about it. We've been talking about
But NATI has been releasing results.
No, but you see, NATI has been releasing results, but the question is this: who's been reading those reports? So what you had found out over a period of time is that NATI sends out a report, and those in the sector read it. But those in the sector reading it are just industry players. They're not the regulators, they're not the government. So maybe now they're reading this report. And you see, when you have excess, you don't seem to take, you don't put focus on what is missing. However, when you have dwindling excess, revenues are dropping, theft is increasing, you can't fund budget, then at this time, both the regulator, both the players, and both the government is taking a more critical look. The Nigerian Navy seems to be doing quite a bit more in terms of that area, in terms of surveillance. But you see, it's a combination of all this. But if it's not sustained, then it will just be another NATI report. And we'll go back to where we're coming from.
Well, let me just ask you, what did you make of this data, this report? Do you trust it 100%, or do you think there could be more?
I think that what I take of this data would be, do I trust it? I'll say to a large extent. And let me say this. There's been some form of track record with NATI over the period of time. Now, what makes it more painful is that if I went to the NUPRC's website, I can't see this. Now, what we need to be able to do with data is that we must collect it over a period of time, put it together to actually show us reports that are dependable. And I'll ask you this, if you went to the OPEC quota, or shall I say the OPEC website, nobody questions the veracity of the reports in terms of crude oil production, because over time they've become trusted. I think NATI has done quite well in that space. And I'll go back to what I said. Who's reading the reports and who's taking actions? I would say to a large extent I trust the NATI reports.
Interesting. So tell me, do you think we're nearing the end of this sort of happenings in the Nigerian oil and gas sector?
I really hope so. And why do I say so? There's more focus, like we said. Now, the second thing is this. If we say we're losing oil based on sabotage, adjustment errors, adjustment errors are not, for want of a better word, they're not major. Plus or minus 1 or 2% is what they would impact in terms of the volumes. But these are things like metering. These are things like stock. These are all things that we can monitor. Every time you move products, be it crude oil or be it distillate, there's a unit of measure. And I don't know if you've heard the word calibration. So what that is just to say that this volume has moved from A to B. And this is what we used to proof it. This is what we used to measure it. By law, they're measuring equipment in all the... So if you go to a platform, if you go to a drilling site, there are meters that are in place. These meters are supposed to be read. These meters are supposed to be calibrated. So it goes back to the regulator. How often do you check these things? If you overmeasure or you undermeasure, then there's either a loss in revenue or a loss in physical product. I think going forward with these things in place and with more exposure, with more focus, with more regular reporting, I think it should become a thing of the past.
Well, how much of these issues are actually being fixed, really?
That's $1 million question. And why do I say that? You find out that in Nigeria, we seem to have problems that we can solve quickly with technology. Now, why we choose not to is a different kettle of fish. If you have a meter that runs, and this is 2024.
And we're also looking at infrastructure also.
Absolutely. And it's worse when you talk about infrastructure because it's two things. Crude oil will move from point A to point B by either vessels or pipeline. So if it moves by pipeline, what it means is that there's supposed to be a unit of measure to see how much crude oil has come out to go through the meters from the wellheads. The second thing is this: how often do we even do maintenance? If a crude oil pipeline has stayed for a certain period of time, it will still corrode. So when it corrodes, that becomes a point for breakage. That's where the theft comes in. But who is tracking and tracing these things? We have regulators who seem not to be on top of the issues they need to be on. If I lose revenue by selling water, then the first thing I'm going to do is make sure there's no leakage in my tank. And if I do that as a private individual, then when you hold the resources or the wealth of a nation, I think they must step up to higher levels of accountability. These metering systems need to be in place. They must be calibrated as and when due. Maintenance around some of those pipelines need to be done, and then we must increase security.
Absolutely. In less than 30 seconds, apart from these issues which we have mentioned, talk to us about, some challenges that also exist in this sector and how to address them in less than 30 seconds.
So very quickly, well, I was talked about theft or not, rig counts are going low. So what it means is that to increase rig count, you have to sensitize the economy and sensitize the public and investment that, look, we're ready for business. There's accountability in this. So what it means is that we must find a way of bringing those investments to begin to explore new rigs. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you so much, Jide Pratt, COO Iona and Country Manager Trade Grid. Thank you for your time on the show today.
Thank you very much.